The Rhode Island Woodland Partnership is a collaboration of organizations that have something to do with conserving woods and forests in Rhode Island. Foresters, forest landowners, conservationists, agency personnel. And if you're somebody who cares about woods or has something to do with the conservation of woods in Rhode Island, think of these as sort of newsletters from the forest. They're a little long if you're just looking for some of our usual content, the explorations in the natural history of Rhode Island. But if you're interested in the conservation of woods, woods and forests, you might find something interesting in these videos and learn a little bit about how a whole system of organizations and people and agencies are all working together to conserve woods, forests, and forest-based jobs in Rhode Island. So here's another one. I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership meeting for October. Good to have you all here. And our intention today is to talk quite a bit about policy and legislative plans and ambitions for the coming year and things going on in that arena, in addition to partner updates. And we're going to use that as a lead-in to revisiting our strategic plan, in that the current one goes from 2017 to the end of the year, and we're going to be looking to update the plan. We'll focus on the policy and economic section today, because that's really the area I think that we had the most activity in over the last 5 years. And we'll walk through the document for hearing people's ideas and talking about what we want to do going forward. So Kate, I know you, we'll go around before that, we'll go around with our introductions. But I'm Christopher Riley. I'm the co-coordinator of the partnership, and I divide my time with a role with University of Rhode Island's Natural Resources Science Department, and my practice Sweet Birch Consulting. We'll just go around. Kate, why don't I pass it off to you next?
Kate Sales, the other co-coordinator of the Woodland Partnership and the director of the Rhode Island Land Trust Council. John, go ahead.
John Mitchell on Prudence Island at Narragansett Bay Research Reserve. Stewardship coordinator here, started this year.
Thanks. David, how about you?
David Gregg. I'm the executive director of the Rhode Island Natural History Survey.
Thanks. And how about Alana?
Hey everyone, long time no see. I'm Alana Russell. I am the URI Biocontrol Lab Manager and also the Rhode Island State Coordinator for the Forest Ecosystem Monitoring Cooperative.
Great to have you here. Patrick.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm a conservation planner with the Southern Rhode Island Conservation District.
Thank you. Go over to Paul.
Paul Dolan, Area Director for the Rhode Island Resource Conservation Development Council.
Thanks, Paul. How about you, Lou?
Hi, Lou Allard. I'm the Urban and Community Forestry Program Coordinator with the Division of Forest Environment.
Great. And going on to just folks who don't have their cameras on, Fern is out there.
Hi, I'm Fern Graves. I'm the Stewardship Coordinator with DEM.
Thank you. And finally, Priscilla.
Hi, everyone. I am the Director of Government Affairs at Audubon Society of Rhode Island, and I am also the President of the Environment Council of Rhode Island. And I apologize, my video might be off for most of this meeting today, but it's good to see you.
Understood.
So
go ahead, Kate.
I have the updates on the Forest Conservation Act today, unless our friends at DEM, Lou or Fern, have any additional updates. I did talk to TJ this morning, and he said the update is that there is no update. The list of names is still with the governor's office being vetted, and we should hear more soon.
Gotcha, understood. We'll hope it does move forward soon, and I'm sure TJ and everyone at DM is looking forward to that even more than we are. So Kate, since you are, very much working in the conservation, policy space now, thought you might be in a good position to walk us through what's going on there and some of the things that, should be on the Woodland Partnership's radar screen as we get into the meat of this year.
Sure. So I have a few updates. There's nothing really solid, but there's a lot of momentum and energy in discussion around a few potential legislative items that are headed our way. As we all know, it's really great that the Forest Conservation Act was passed, not only identifying forests as important in general, but as an important piece to the climate change resiliency issue in addressing climate change and resiliency. So I think that we have that. That's a good start. And there's a lot of energy currently around starting to noodle, and I'm going to use air quotes, and have loose conversations about revisiting solar siting and ensuring that we have forest conservation as a large piece of that puzzle. That conversation, and Priscilla, you can jump in. Again, it's been very loose, starting with a group of ECRI members sort of tossing out ideas that have to do basically around sorting out exactly how much renewable energy Rhode Island needs to meet our climate change goals, defining areas of conservation concern for connectivity, wildlife, and climate change resiliency, which is our piece, and then thinking about preferred siting and non-preferred siting. So this conversation is not a new conversation. All of the pieces are here that were there a few years ago. We're just trying to figure out a way to have a concerted and coordinated effort if we are going to pursue solar siting as a legislative option. So we've got that. Again, if anyone, everything's in such a loose early phase of brainstorming that I don't have anything to present to you. But I imagine that soon enough, you will be seeing some drafts and information coming out. I just also wanted to flag that I am an ECRI member as a part of the Land Trust Council and intend to, I can be the bridge for the Woodland Partnership. I'm happy to, I know Priscilla is also in this room, but I'm happy to be the liaison. As we discussed, it's one less, we had the vote last year as to whether or not we should join ECRI. While I am in that space with my Land Trust Council hat on, I'm happy to share all the information. I don't think that we are, it's the same stuff. So the other big topic of conversation, and I'm sure it's the topic of conversation among all of our organizations, is the ARPA funding and figuring out the ways to look at the funding that exists and try to be creative about how we can look at that funding for forest conservation and how we can loop forest conservation into the climate change resilience piece, looking at the ARPA funding. So I've been part of a ECRI policy committee subgroup, sort of looking at the ARPA funding in sort of like buckets. We're referring to the subjects as buckets, where we can look at things like transportation or housing or climate change mitigation and come up with some funding ideas that would be able to, like, yes, and as Sue Anderbaugh said, some of the things coming down the pike. So if we're talking about affordable housing and having a plan for that, we can say, well, yes, and we have all of these ideas for funding for ensuring renewable energy and ensuring smart siting for those housing efforts. So I want to just give a rundown of what the buckets are that we're talking about. And I would encourage any and all of your ideas related to these buckets, and how we can think about them in terms of forest conservation. So climate mitigation and energy, transportation, natural climate change solutions, climate resilience, environmental justice, waste, water and toxics, forests and open space, and anything that's overarching. So what I'm doing is looking at this with the value of Rhode Island's forests as sort of like the primer that already has our recommendations for legislation related to forest conservation and already spells out how forest conservation can be a part that fits into all of those buckets for policy recommendations. And that's where I'm going with that on our end. And the big piece that I think we need to start talking about is the 2022 bond issue. I've done a little bit of background work in terms of trying to sort out what the recommended budget was to the governor's office on behalf of DEM and what it was included in terms of land conservation. So thinking about the open space piece in the bond and the ALPC agriculture piece that will be recommended in the bond. In terms of land conservation, I spoke to Terry Gray, the interim director of DEM, and there is $9 million that was recommended to the governor's office for land conservation. And of that $9 million, $4 million was flagged for local grants and $5 million was for the general fund for these conservation projects. The issue that we're having, or that I can see from the land conservation side, is that that's nice, like that we have $5 million for conservation, but it is not directed towards anything. It's not flagged for agriculture or farmland conservation, and it's not flagged specifically for open space. So at this point, it's just funding for conservation with no direction. I think that there's some other things to flag. One, it appears like the finance office doesn't necessarily have a great handle on how land conservation projects happen and the necessity to have money constantly in the open space fund or the ALPC fund and not to spend those funds down. So while there is about $1.75 million left in the ALPC fund, it's all earmarked towards projects. So while it hasn't been actually spent down yet, it is all going to be spent down. So I think that internally we need to start having a coordinated effort around both agriculture and open space on making sure we have consistent funding, that it meets our needs, and that our open space funding in Rhode Island is really critical for not only all of our partners doing land conservation work, but for our federal partners and how they spend their money in Rhode Island. We use all the ways that we can to make projects happen. And if we are losing a critical piece of that on the state level, we won't be able to do large scale projects. So I believe that the good thing is that money was flagged for land conservation. The concerning part is that it's not directed anywhere, and we're going to need to have an internal conversation and potentially do some advocacy work on that end. Also, in terms of the climate of values for property, right now is the first time where we're seeing a lot of those forest landowners with large tracts that are close to areas that we want to conserve or are in areas that we want to conserve, and large scale farm owners who have been holding onto their properties. The market is really great for them right now, and they're all now interested in conserving their properties, which is great, but we need to make sure we have the money to be able to do so. So that's the other piece in the background. I'm wondering if any, I don't want to just sit here and talk. Are there any other thoughts about legislation, or have there been discussions about legislation that have been happening in your circles or within your organizations?
Thanks, Kate.
One of the,
Really
well,
appreciate the broad overview, but yeah, good to hear some other perspectives. David.
yeah, well, I was going to say, Kate, one of the things that we were working with Rupert on off and on for years has been the invasive plant legislation. And we tried some complicated formulations early on. And then recently we've been trying simply to delete the word aquatic from the existing aquatic invasive plant legislation statute. And that seemed to have some traction in the last session, and I have no idea where we left off with that, but I know that's something that we were working on.
Okay. Thank you. The other piece that the Land Trust Council is going to be working on with historic preservation is the idea of bringing the Community Preservation Act from Massachusetts to Rhode Island. Kind of repackaging it as the Community Preservation and Resiliency Act, which, for some background, is essentially enabling legislation that allows cities and towns to designate a transfer tax, which would go specifically towards either conservation or historic preservation. It's been passed in Massachusetts, I think, for close to 20 years, and the cities and towns that have adopted it in Massachusetts have seen great successes. So that's something that we are working on in the background as well, which has implications for forest conservation.
Is there a feeling for how or what the climate is for trying to move that act this year? I know it was a pretty progressive session of the legislature last year, but some of those of you who are closer to the pulse might know about that.
I'm information gathering right now and meeting with the historic preservation folks next week. So I will have more information on the climate and potential for that at our next meeting. Priscilla, you are far more versed in this legislative piece than I am. Do you have anything to add in terms of the?
Well, in terms of what I'll be focusing my time on at Audubon, I think you cover some of those pieces, Kate, which is, well, first taking a step back, I think ensuring that whatever comes out of the Forest Conservation Act can go ahead and inform the efforts of this group, but also help inform the challenge of solar siting. And I'm pretty optimistic that we could work towards a solution, a more comprehensive solution on solar siting, working together. So those ideas are still in the works and can hopefully help drive whatever we can move forward throughout the legislative session. And then otherwise from my end, really focused on pesticides and the impacts to pollinators. So we're going to be working on continuing the effort to move that bill that Mick Kerr was working on with DEM, the neonics bill, making sure that we could regulate neonics and that we can also take them off the hands of regular consumers and focus on ensuring that there is a licensing process for those that use neonics. So that's going to be another focus. And then beyond that is really, for me, making sure that the Act on Climate is implemented successfully. And there's a lot of moving components to that. There's like further legislation that will be needed and regulations that will come from that also have implications for environmental justice communities and how equity is centered throughout that process. So those are the big things I'm thinking about. And then Kate mentioned other work of the Environment Council of Rhode Island, really trying to make sure that whatever federal money comes into the state, it's also used in a way that centers our goals around climate mitigation and also climate resiliency. So making sure that those funds are used through those lenses in addition to equity. So I think that there's hopefully some momentum there in creating sort of our list of projects where that money could go, whether it is using ARPA money or pending money through the infrastructure bill that's still in question in Congress. But whatever money is available, making sure that it's through that equity mitigation and resiliency lens. And then, of course, the conversations that Kate mentioned pertaining to the bond are very much happening, and that process is moving along. We've been hearing about sort of the traditional green bond, but also this idea of a climate bond. So figuring out, what that means for our purposes, and if that moves forward, how we can influence that for climate mitigation work and also resiliency work. And I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but there's a lot there. And I will say also through the Environment Council, other priorities where we left off included PFAS in drinking water and food packaging. So I see that momentum still continuing, and the work around plastics as well.
Thank you. I think it's important to note that there's a lot of energy around climate change, and all of there's a gubernatorial race that's about to happen. There's all sorts of plans that are in the works. We have Act on Climate. Everything is focused in this lens right now, and it's an opportunity legislatively to work together to get forest conservation involved in the conversation.
Absolutely agree, Kate. I think that's a great point. And I think what makes me excited is to work together in spaces like this and across different spaces to really connect the dots and really try to amplify the areas where we have that common ground and common vision, because I think that's what really had an impact in passing the Act on Climate. So I think if we can continue that, we'll be much more successful in future legislative sessions. And maybe, I think like Kate, you mentioned that we're walking into, another year, right, of legislative session of dealing with the pandemic. That's a wild card, and also the election. So I think whatever we do now is really also setting up the framework for how successful we'll be come 2023 as well.
Well, thanks to you all for setting the scene, as it were, and providing an overview of all the different things that are going on and possibilities for this coming year. One of the things I'm certainly wondering about is how the Woodland Partnership might focus its efforts, and how we could bring our resources to bear in the in the form of the the contributions and work of our members and organizations, and where the greatest intersection is of our interest on some of these different topics. Certainly the the Forest Conservation Act was a big focus of our efforts, really for a couple of years, and culminating last year with a number of those who were in a position to do so, helping develop and advocate for the passage of the Forest Conservation Act, and kind of provided a nice focus for the partnership to coalesce around. And just thinking about what how we might work on now, and open to all of your thoughts about that.
I certainly don't want to be the only one talking, but I've got ideas. For years we've been having this conversation about prioritizing exactly where those are defining our most obvious areas of forests that are of concern. I think that we need to decide as a partnership, like where we want to prioritize those areas in future discussions.
So priority forest conservation areas, like
Yes.
on a map.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And we've got plenty of maps and we have plenty of resources in that way. Like we can utilize TNC's resiliency map. We have Paul Jordan is a great resource and he's very helpful. We have, I'm sure we could get him to help us with a few things. Yeah, the framework is there. No wheel needs to be recreated. We just need to decide internally, I think as a partnership, what we want to say is the most important to us.
Gotcha. So there's a lot of work that's been done on, you know, DNC working on, say, you know, areas of forest that maybe, you know, most resilient looking ahead, those, you know, 250 and, you know, 500 acre blocks of core forest to other, you know, iconic lands. So choosing what we value most from all that.
Rare
Are there any
species
thoughts about how
habitat.
much we could ask for, or you know, or how you sort of scaling that to what would seem like a reasonable level?
I don't know. I'm not sure that we've gotten that far.
I think
We're
one
not,
of-
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, a lot of times when we start down the path of picking, you know, the best places to prioritize, it ends up being kind of a stampede to the least accessible, least visible forest you can find. And I think that in this day and age, we need to, I actually think coming up with criteria that would accommodate accessibility and value to urban and non-hegemonic peoples would be a really great accomplishment. We could, you know, the criteria are almost more important than the map because it would be a statement about why forests matter. Anyway, I just want to say that before we get all excited about finding the perfect forest out in the middle of nowhere that if we're successful, no one will ever see.
Correct. I agree. And I think that the conversations are happening in the background about working on accessibility and making that a priority.
I agree that could be a good thing, you know, for us to focus on. Could be an interesting, you know, topic for a meeting, you know, potentially when we could, I don't know if we're be doing it by Zoom or in person at some point, but you know, look at some of these maps and as a group who knows a fair amount about forests to talk about some developing criteria that incorporate these different things. Let's see. Any other thoughts on that, or things that you know some of the rest of you who have been a bit quieter so far would like to see moved forward, or the your organization has a particular interest in. I know some of our the people in the Woodland Partnership, some of those who've been most active in forest policy aren't here now, but that's also a chance to to hear some other perspectives and to get a diversity of opinions. We've got some there's some big legislative our opportunities here between the solar siting, which went over the ARPA funding, the bond, and the Community Preservation and Resiliency Act. Those are all could have our work cut out for us with any one of those.
Getting back to the, I'm sorry, I had to jump off for a second. Getting back to the deciding on the forest part, I think we also need to be thoughtful about and understanding about the fact that we are not going to conserve all of it, and we need to make some concessions when it comes to renewable energy. And just flagging that as a thing that we need to recognize and work on in a organized fashion.
Mhm.
Do we need to update our thinking on forest users in sort of post-COVID era? I mean, where are we with the sort of extractive uses of forests, forest products, and where are we with passive recreation in forests? Are we up, I'm not sure this would be a priority for us, but it does make me, I do think we should at least stop and ask whether our ideas have changed in the last 2 years.
On the passive recreation front, the Land Trust Council has trail counters that became very relevant and very useful during the pandemic. And I'm very glad that they were up, showing that we have, between our Explore RI website and the amount of people on the trails, mid-pandemic, there was something like a 300% increase in use, which is huge. And also, from a New York Times article that came out pretty recently, and I can send a link to it, in a few polls and surveys, it appears that the folks that are utilizing trails want to keep up this behavior after the pandemic. So really, we are, at least in that front, interested in maintaining that momentum and bolstering that interest in our forest land.
I'm just thinking, since we're going to be getting involved with strategic planning later in this over coming meetings, but I think this the topic of identifying priority forest areas could be an interesting thing for us to dive into, sort of in the stewardship area, or might be something that we could direct some focus towards. So maybe we could flag that as an activity to undertake. And then for forest, updating forest uses and users, there's also the education focus area of our existing strategic plan, which was actually of the three areas: policy and economics, stewardship, and education. That was the one that where we actually did the the least work over the past 5 years. And I think we might possibly consider shifting the focus of that a little bit to education and engagement, or engagement more broadly, if that could capture some of these kinds of things, on who's out in the woods, and how are we using them. So just a couple of thoughts to put out there.
Thank you.
David, you mentioned the invasive plant legislation, which was interesting. Is that something that in the past that your organization has worked on, or who's helped advance and put together that?
So the Natural History Survey has, for the last 20 years, I guess, chaired the Rhode Island Invasive Species Council, which, I don't know, comes and goes in terms of activity. It's sort of functions similarly to the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership, in the sense that it's a sort of a non-structured place where people who are interested in invasive species can come to discuss things and share news and offer assistance and stuff like that. So we've been involved with the issue of invasives for a long time. We had the first incarnation of the Forest Health Works project was devoted to mapping and removing invasive plants from priority forest areas. So since that time, we've really been focused on the impact of invasive plants on forests, and that was 2009, 10, 11, really. And at the time, it was kind of crazy that we were spending money to remove invasive plants that were simultaneously being purchased and installed, sort of on the other side of the road. And we started to think about how to come up with an invasive plant list for Rhode Island that's complementary to our neighbors in Rhode Island and Connecticut and Massachusetts, so that we're not essentially the leak in the dam. So way back in the day, that didn't go very far because the nursery industry was really strongly aligned against it. Since that time, I think invasives have become less important part of the economics of the nursery industry, and recently discussions with folks in that business that I've had have been more open to movement on an invasive plant, some sort of invasive plant legislation. The invasive plant statute, the invasive aquatic plant statute that is now in statute is a big deal, because it's the first time that we've had really a lever, regulatory, sort of access to invasive anything. And so that was why we looked at that as a focus for possibly coming up with a broader invasive plant, structure for regulatory structure. And I believe that DEM was supportive of the legislative initiative in the last go around, and that strategy. And so, it would be interesting to see where we were with that. I think we've had trouble getting sponsors on both sides of the assembly at the same time. And it's come up, I don't know, the last several times it's come up because a representative or senator's constituent was freaking out about bamboo coming in from a neighbor's yard. So first time it came up, it was a bamboo bill, and it had sort of like all the other invasive plants attached to it. And that was it was a little too complicated, but to really get through. And that's why we came up with this other formulation where you could just delete the word aquatic from the existing statute and make a list that was then all the invasive plants, and you could put bamboo in there. That's kind of where we are with that. And obviously this is something that has to be done in, really with a lot of leadership from DEM, because ultimately that statute requires DEM to put out, to create the list of invasive plants, and that's a heavy lift. So obviously that's gotta, you can pass all the statutes you want, and if they're not going to be enforced, it doesn't do any good. So we really have to work really closely with DEM and follow their lead on some of this. But I think it's important. It's nuts that Rhode Island is, the whole, that all the, you still buy burning bush in Rhode Island, but not in our neighbors. So
Or barberry.
Barberry, you name it. Yeah, and it would be a start to a larger, sensible approach to invasive issues. I mean, we know there's a stand of kudzu in Rhode Island that was sort of turned in by a citizen a couple of years ago, and there's no structure or locus of responsibility to make sure that gets eradicated. Here's an early detection species. It's going to be more prominent with climate change. It's a big deal, and there's nobody minding the store on that. There's no structure to go out and help the homeowners or provide carrots and sticks to make sure that the homeowners tackle that. And that's just one example. There are others.
So I mean, before it was the nurseries and landscaping as the opposition, and it seems like they're sort of getting to be on the same page. Is there any other anticipated objection on that from another group or organization? And when, out of curiosity, when thinking about needing it to be enforced, what are Connecticut and Massachusetts doing?
So just a word about the nursery industry. I wouldn't have said that it was an opposition at first, because I think that they were open to the idea of an invasive plant list and to, sort of recommended levels of restriction for invasive plants. But it was kind of like the cigarette companies wanted to study things a little more. They wanted to put the most, the plants that would have had the biggest impact on their bottom line in a needs more, research category. And that's water under the bridge. That's 20 years ago. And I think that they've got a much more sophisticated, kind of thinking on all of this now. And so I think that right now the issue would be more with the kind of small government, types who don't want this, don't tell me what I can plant in my yard types, not with the nursery and landscape industry or the green industry. And I don't know about how the regulatory regime works in Massachusetts. I don't know who's responsible for chasing that down. I would guess the Department of Agriculture or something like that, which I would think, since they regulate nurseries in Rhode Island, that might be a logical place to start, but I don't want to speak for them.
I'm hoping that, Mass Audubon, because sometimes participates in Woodland Partnership meetings, usually through Heidi Ricci, it might be able to provide some insight on that. Thanks, David. That's very helpful, historical and current context.
Can I ask for a little clarity? David, I was it sounded like the legislation would be about plants that could be imported and purchased, for example. And then you made reference to the kudzu situation that I'm guessing was was growing wild somewhere. And there was a question of, it sounded like you were referring to legislation that would require, for example, DEM or somebody to go address that if it was reported. Those sound like two pretty different topics. Is that the type of bill that would cover both of those things, or?
No, I was thinking about it as just sort of a start, until we have an invasive plant list in Rhode Island that's official and has statutory, sort of standing, we're going to get nowhere, so let's get that. And then we have to think about, I don't want to make it be like the answer is to come down on people like a ton of bricks using, sort of government authority, because the two landowners in the case of kudzu, they're moderately cooperative, but there's nobody responsible to go cooperate with them. The survey, I've called and I've emailed. I got, no response now in follow-up with them. And, the survey is a nonprofit. We don't really have any, status to go knock on the door. But if DEM had somebody who was responsible for that, we could do like a good cop, bad cop thing where like the helpful non-regulatory, nonprofit comes along and offers assistance. But, really our capacity is being supported somehow too, and DEM is sort of like, play with the nonprofit or else or something. I don't know, maybe, but we can't even start that conversation as long as we've got no regulation whatsoever.
I do want to flag that sounds like the districts are fairly familiar with that landscape and being a non-regulatory, non-enforcement, we're here to help kind of organization. So
there's a bunch of parties that could play a part in this, and it's like a lot of things. It's kind of an ecosystem with lots of different lots of different players who can each have a role, but as long as it's, there's no basis in anything for it. We're just, it's all kind of for yucks. It's not really for real. So.
It sounds like this topic kind of falls, it's right like a bullseye right in the sort of the Venn diagram of where sort of policy and stewardship certainly overlap. Maybe sort of education and engagement too, but
yeah,
I think this could be a good opportunity for the partnership to do something with this.
Yeah, in my experience, invasives are everybody's fourth priority, and so and so they get no attention from anybody. Everybody would name them as a priority, but because they're below the top three, nothing happens.
They're also really hard.
Oh.
Sorry, Pat. They're really hard.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I'm sitting here trying to think of how the conservation districts could play into this, and I'm just thinking maybe a good first step would be to, like, during our site visits that we go on with farmers or private landowners with 20 acres of forest, maybe we could show up with a list and say, these are some priority invasive species that you should look out for. We already sort of do that, but it's not really in our checklist when we go out and meet with folks. So maybe we can try to add that.
But truly, we're talking from an organizational perspective. It may be the fourth priority on all of our lists, but I will tell you it's number 1 or 2 on every single forest landowners list, and all of them are dealing with invasives. So it is like actually
got to be one of the top 3 or 4 natural resources conservation service practices for forest landowners in the state. So that's another entity that might be involved.
I mean, it's been said that invasives are, the largest, have the largest impact on rare species after development. Maybe climate change now has jumped to the head of the class, but it's a big deal. And I don't think, it's partly we don't want to mix up kind of like the early detection and regulatory, sort of early detection and importation side of the question from stewardship of existing lands, because that way madness lies. You could spend an infinite amount of time and energy on invasives and you dissipate everybody's like patience and resources. But there are for sure priorities that you could tackle. I mean, knotweed, we did the knotweed free Arcadia project, and that was kind of a sideline to our other work. It wasn't even that big a deal. And so the goal, we identified a certain, I don't know, I think it was roads, all the roads within a certain kind of box we wanted to be knotweed free. And we went, and because it doesn't spread, it spreads kind of along roadsides. And so if we could make this one big block that was knotweed free, that would really be a good use of resources. And it didn't take many resources. We did some door hangers and knocked on doors, and then we had some contractors, some herbicide contractors who could, if we got landowner agreement, could come along and help them out. And once that program ended, we didn't monitor it anymore. So I would imagine there's knotweed in Arcadia now, but the idea was that it was a manageable amount, and with attention it could be done. So that's an example. And the kudzu's another example. There are a bunch.
David,
Was that part of the Forest Health Works project, David?
Sorry?
Was that part of the Forest Health Works project, the knotweed free Arcadia?
Yeah. So Forest Health Works project's main work was mapping and managing invasive plants, and then training unemployed landscapers to manage invasive plants. And then some of the spin-offs from that were kind of sidelines, with the Rhode Native Project, the Youth Conservation League, and Knotweed Free Arcadia. And they were done as they were like add-ons to the main project. That's how small the resources that were necessary were.
David, you mentioned I think you said unemployed landscapers or nursery workers were involved in that. Was that with RINLAW, Rhode Island Nursery and Landscape Association?
Yeah, that was it was an Obama stimulus project. And so, with the housing collapse, there were a lot of losses in the job market from nurseries and landscape businesses. And so that was kind of the pitch there. And this was done in our partnership was through Division of Forest Environment and the U.S. Forest Service. And so the idea was to not just fight invasives, but really the reason it was a stimulus project was because it gave landscapers an additional kind of business opportunity where we trained them in invasive identification and management, and then they could advertise that as an additional service additional expertise that they had. And then we contracted with them to do the removals of the priority patches that we found. So it was cool. We did a lot of good work. And there's a layer. I mean, speaking of mapping layers, there's a mapping layer of the invasives that were mapped. Well, the two parts of that. One, the forests that we identified as priorities using certain criteria. So that's actually an interesting map by itself. And then the map of the invasives and the map of the invasives that were managed.
I'll get back to you with some questions about that because we've been talking about something with RINLAW on that.
Yeah. I've been talking with Shannon about their current jobs project, which I think sounds really cool. Yeah.
Thanks.
Were there other policy topics that we'd like to hear a bit more about, or have more discussion, or dig a little deeper on before we move on?
I might be reaching out to some of you individually on the whole buckets of funding idea. I know I've bounced a couple ideas off of Christopher, but just if there's a missed piece that I'm not thinking of, so heads up.
Hey, can you talk about who's going to make the decisions about that and how that will be done and by when?
Priscilla, do you know? I mean, it's still a really loose conversation, and I think the end goal is to present something to ECRI, to have ECRI write a letter to the governor and some legislators being like, these are what we want to prioritize with this funding. These are the but to also have in our back pocket the buckets of funding for anything that we know that the ARPA money is getting spent on.
Yeah, that's right, Kate. It's still pretty loose timeline wise, but I think we might be aiming to have something ready before the start of the legislative session, which the General Assembly is going to reconvene January 4th. So we do want legislators to receive something from the group before then. And then there was also the idea that, that would be a cover letter and sort of, it would be accompanied by a cover letter. And then we would continue evolving that list of projects. So there would be probably several iterations of that letter over the course of the General Assembly convening.
Yeah, I think for our end, just to recognize that it's an opportunity to have forest conservation like woven into all of those separate topics. Thanks,
Hey, well, thanks. This is a good discussion that we're getting into just the right time. But perhaps this is a good segue into the strategic plan here.
I think so. I know all of you have taken the time to go back and read the strategic plan in the last couple of weeks. Aha, John! Wow. Christopher, why don't you take it away?
All right, great. Can you let me share my screen, Kate? So I'm just going to take a a quick walk through some of the key sections of our 2017 to 21 strategic plan, focusing on the policy and economic section, and then we can have a discussion about it, which I think will lead to generating some ideas, and that'll be a first step towards a draft. All right, just everybody can see that. So the the Woodlands Partnership's first strategic plan was developed with funding from a strategy grants from the Rhode Island Foundation, and it was carried out through a number of workshops in 2016 that were facilitated by Jen West of the Narragansett Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, and we worked with Amanda Mahaffey of the Forest Stewards Guild and actually teasing out and developing the plan. But I'll just bring you to our key principles for collaboration here. I think it's important to revisit this just to see if we're still there. I'll just read them and you can think about it. The partnership's an informal network of people representing private and public organizations and agencies that develop and implement a shared forest conservation within Rhode Island. Together, these groups work to achieve conservation on a large scale. And these are the principles by which we agree to work together to achieve our mutual goal of inspiring a culture of forest conservation throughout Rhode Island. One, the partnership's based on voluntary cooperation. Two, the goal of the partnership is not to dictate, but to facilitate informed decisions. Three, when disagreements arise, rational dialogue will be employed to work through differences. Four, the partnership's guided by mutual self-interest, with the intention that there's something in it for everyone. Five, the efforts of the partnership will clarify terminology, reduce fears, and promote a common understanding of potentially divisive concepts. For example, commercial timber harvesting, conservation easements, comprehensive plans, or data layers on maps, or some things that have caused controversy in the past or in some other areas. Six, there are no single one-size-fits-all solutions, but rather there's a range of tools, strategies, and levels of commitment that lead towards keeping forests as forests and having them well taken care of. And then finally, seven, the partnership will bring together constituencies with similar interests that may not have traditionally worked together. For example, the land trust community and the forest products and logging industry. So does anybody have any, want to share any thoughts or comments on these? If these seem like what we've been doing, or how we could be focusing on collaborating, or are there any things that we might want to consider adjusting or adding?
I think we could spend some more energy on the diversifying piece, and start thinking through accessibility of our group and how we need to be more thoughtful. So I just want to put that out there. I think we could do some work in that direction.
I agree with you there. That was the one that stood out to me in reviewing this. I wonder if there are any that aren't included now that we might want to consider. Well, we can we'll come back to this again. I think when we tackle the next session, revisit these as well. So I'll move on down into the policy and economic section. It's just talking about the planning process. And there's this impact map concept that we used, just talking about the resources that we had to work with, where we'd like to go in terms of impact and what we needed to do in terms of activities and enabling conditions to get there. I haven't actually myself used an impact map and other planning processes. So it's something, we can consider if this is something that we want to update or leave it as is. And then just so you can see, how we're focusing want to focus our energies here to increase forest conservation efforts from the social, economic, and ecological sides. All right, I'm gonna go down to policy and economics. Make this a little bigger. It's just a chart of it all. We want to see, policymakers, understand forest benefits, decision makers to have knowledge, the state forest action plan to be supported, and the state to recognize forest economic benefits. Those were what we were really working towards with different activities to do that.
I just want to say that I'm pretty impressed at what we've been able to accomplish. When you look at those pretty significant goals from 2016, 2017, I think we've done a lot.
I'll point out, so the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership is, part of the Regional Conservation Network, which is other partnerships, largely around New England, also New York State, and extending, into the Mid-Atlantic a bit. I'll be, mentioning their upcoming RCP network gathering in mid-November. If you haven't participated before, highly recommend that you do. There's a timely focus on, land justice this year, but the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership among them is more loosely structured than most. Some partnerships have, they have staff who are devoting a greater percentage of their time to leading the partnership than Kate and I do, and some of them they have a budget with funds that are contributed by the member organizations, or they've apply for grants that are managed by the partnership. And we've worked with the Rhode Island RC&D Council, has been it was our fiscal agent for this project. We've talked about possibilities for other grants, but it's mostly people bringing their their time and support from the the organizations or the practices that they work with. So just as I recall, when we were doing this, we really started with the policy focus, but we added in economics explicitly, since that was such an important pillar of Governor Raimondo's administration. And so that's really why that's there. And I guess we can think about, if it makes sense to keep that or not moving forward. So the Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council was getting going at that time. And we were interested in getting representation on the EC4 committee, and I guess we do in a way, in that DEM convenes it and is very much involved, but I believe we will learn that the structure of the EC4 is such that it it wasn't going to happen that the Woodland Partnership would have a seat on the actual council or the board, as it were. So that took a bit of a different form. Want to review and comment on proposed solutions for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, to ensure that forests are included in the dialogue, and the report that was produced. And this is something that happens. The partnership developed a position statement on the role of forests in mitigating and playing a role in climate change adaptation, and largely thanks to the efforts of Paul Roselli, forests are recognized in the state's greenhouse gas plan and accounted for there. I don't think I have the formal title of it quite right, but that proved to be a somewhat lighter list than expected, just by coming to the meetings and showing up and participating, but it proved to be actually pretty important. So want to leverage the there's the first economic impact study that was developed for Rhode Island along with the other southern New England states. And we want to see that 25 General Assembly members recognize the forests and have an economic benefit. And there has since been work on the area of forest economic benefits, namely through the study that Tom Sproul at URI did on the value of Rhode Island's forest-based economy, the 2019 report on the value of Rhode Island's forests that the Conservation Advisory Committee did, also certainly gets into that. I'm not in a great position myself to comment on how much sort of the metrics of how many more General Assembly members have that on their radar screens now. I don't know if any of you who work more directly in policy would. Okay.
I don't know.
So we wanted to connect forests to human benefits, and talk about providing information to key audiences in the General Assembly, Commerce Rhode Island, and legislators' towns about the the links between forest trees and conservation to health, tourism, mitigating severe weather. I think there has been some action in this area, and this is just the focus of some of our conversation earlier in the meeting, but there's certainly more to do in this area. And we had talked about and hoped to organize an event for legislators. There's the Ag Day at the State House that has been broadened to be agriculture and seafood day, I believe, and where we envisioned bringing Woodlands into that as well, but that's not something that we were able to accomplish during this 5-year period. Moving on down, we want to get involved with forest-friendly zoning. Working with Grow Smart Rhode Island and efforts to encourage towns to allow accessory businesses on forest land, and then also training community officials, trying to encourage them to amend their comprehensive plans to establish a no loss of forest policy and adopt smart growth land use techniques. And this is something that the Woodland Partnership was very much involved with, mostly through Scott Millar's work with Grow Smart Rhode Island. Certainly involved in a lot of training of community officials. I don't think we were ultimately able to make the change to allow accessory businesses on forest land. I know he worked on that and came close. And then, of course, the issue of solar siting became larger on the radar screen, over the course of the plan period. And by the end, that was really a primary focus of his efforts. Continuing on down here, we want to see a broader range of economic interests represented in the partnership, including those not traditionally recognized for their connection to forests. So, having the traditional, wood products industry, but other more, secondary products, nursery and landscape industry, water, recreation and tourism, and so forth. There was an effort to establish sort of an industry working group. I guess I'll talk a little bit about that more under the next one. That's sort of moved in fits and starts. Providence Water has participated in the partnership. Of course, I was a big part of that when I was there, but have since moved. But I think there's an opportunity to do a lot more with recreation and tourism and non-consumptive services side, healthcare, for example. And then I mentioned the industry focus group, but there was some money actually left over at the end of the strategic plan process, and we've called for having the Rhode Island's forest industry, convene to talk about their needs and do a sort of SWOT analysis, and challenges and opportunities moving forward, and did conduct that focus group and came up with what I think is a pretty good report. In RIFCO, the Rhode Island Forest Conservators Organization, is trying to create structure for them to move forward with that. I think there was some reticence of people actually working in the wood products industry to take a leadership role in moving that forward, and that has helped contribute that to the fact that it hasn't move farther than it has. But RIFCO and Mark Tremblay can probably provide an update when they're with us next. And then finally, I want to prioritize local wood, sort of following the local agriculture model, exploring opportunities to increase demand and give priority to local wood products. And I think with recently with the Division of Forest Environment essentially becoming one department with the Division of Agriculture, they are starting to be able to take advantage of those marketing campaigns and resources. And there's the recent hire, Jack Sisson, who's working on both agricultural and wood products marketing. That there's going to be more action there. So I'll stop there and just give people to absorb that for a moment before we sort of turn our attention to what we may want to do specifically, generally and specifically going forward in this area.
Thanks for giving us the overview, Christopher. It's helpful to put it all into context that way.
Of course. So now I would see this as a sort of a kind of a brainstorming and discussion session for sort of putting down some preliminary ideas about what we might want to do in the policy and economics area over the next 5 years, looking at how, I guess we're looking out to 2027. Maybe a good place to start is just to think about what we would like to keep from the last 5 years, but maybe update in some kind of way.
I'm struck by how much this looks like a document from and olden times, with the sort of the priorities and the things that were big, the EC4 and stuff like that. And I think, on the one hand, you have to have a document that has specific things in it, and actually this is terrific for that. And that it's time to redo it, because it does look like it came from a certain era. So I don't know exactly where to tackle first in terms of coming up with this era's priorities, but I think it's definitely time to do this.
There's a good point about it, or the sort of the balance between, having flexibility to evolve over time and then being specific about particular issues or things that you want to try to move forward on. Well, I think the EC4 is one that we can take off the list this time, though we'll certainly want to be involved on the climate front and in other ways.
Yeah, so I received those update emails, and I'm happy to, when I review them, make the partnership aware of any information that's relevant. And as they come out, there is some relevant information. Perhaps anyone from our partnership would like to attend the RIWP program review listening session on November 8th. There are things that come up. I don't think we need to be an EC4 member for that.
Well, then I guess the next question is that, you see that, there's the greenhouse gas report there. That's something that's a existing or historic document now, but how do we want to be involved in the climate policy arena?
Would that be something maybe more on a monitoring side? What the specific actions are, change a lot, and everything's kind of up in flux, where it's hard to say what project we could most productively take on, but maybe there's some way to support someone who's generating. So all of the carbon and the climate change and the water initiatives that other agencies and partners are undertaking will need data in order to evaluate their successes and where they need more work. Maybe the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership could be supporting monitoring initiatives as one of our priorities, to make sure that the discussions that are taking place at all these places are informed with the latest data. I was sort of thinking about how the water sector had the Environmental Monitoring Collaborative, which it's kind of dormant right now, but the need is still there to have an advocate for monitoring, because otherwise monitoring can get brushed under the rug, or like the first thing that gets cut when budgets get tight. So maybe we could be an advocate for forest monitoring.
To support forest monitoring initiatives, and help make sure that policy discussions are informed with the latest data and information of forests.
Something like that.
Yeah.
This is actually a great opportunity now that we are working in partnership with the FEMC and have Alana as a member of the Woodland Partnership to think about ways we can offer monitoring options and then support them through the FEMC.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kate. I was just about to pipe up. And also, there's definitely some great tools very recently that are coming down the pipeline from FEMC that I did want to talk about. And, we can find that space for that. But some of them specifically being, like Kate, you shared it with the group, the forest impacts of climate change and stuff like that, that really are identifying gaps in programs and in the literature, and therefore maybe, will help us identify maybe how we can then be more supportive.
Mhm. So we are, identifying if there are, areas where there's a need for monitoring and trying to help find resources to, to get that going.
I also think if we are looking at policy work more generally within keeping forest conservation in mind as the focus, I don't think we need to clarify it more than that. Like the Forest Conservation Act happened. That's good. That's a good first step. And we know that we want to approach forest conservation in terms of mitigation and climate change, and water quality, and like all the other reasons why forests are important. I think that if we broadly say monitor legislation and provide input, that could be an option as well, so that we're not saying, oh, we like EC4 or something very specific. We can kind of keep that piece open.
So we'll monitor and provide, input on legislation, relevant legislation. Seems, we can be able to be specific about some things, but do we feel solid that, supporting the, the implementation of the Forest Conservation Act and funding that could, help it really have an impact? That's something that we want to support. Add that in.
Is there something about supporting, I'm not sure what to call them, forest conservation opportunities like the new Forest Health Works project, or the water quality protection funds that we heard about last month? I mean, it's kind of like these people keep coming to us and saying like, help me spend my money. And I feel like that they keep coming to us because it must be a need. And, we don't want them to fail. We don't want them to fail to spend money conserving forests.
So I think a need in that regard, David, is we don't have a comprehensive database that we look at when we're looking at conserving forest land that is sources of funding all laid out as they change, evergreen, so yes, these non-traditional partners are approaching us recognizing that we know the players and know the parcels, but it would be great if we had something we could constantly refer to that lays out all of those funding opportunities. But I also want to note that knowing we are an all volunteer coordinated group and we don't have a pot of funding for somebody to collaborate on that, maybe it's just something where we have a Google Doc where we're updating it as partners when funding opportunities present themselves.
Or maybe it's not, maybe it's not a person's job. It may be that there's an existing that existing organizations within the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership have capacity. That's what they're created to have, the capacity to connect, to make those connections within certain sectors, like RIFCO or I don't know, Natural History Survey or something, where we don't want to recreate capacity for keeping track of things that exists in our members. And so maybe the database are the meetings. Like, is there an agenda item in every other meeting where we say, you know, I don't know, put the projects on the table, or I don't know, send your projects to Chris and he's going to turn them around and send them out to everybody. I don't know. There's like, maybe we're that database.
Yeah, maybe we are. Maybe we've been doing it all along too. There is the other piece of, yes, these non-traditional partners have approached us. Maybe we need to look more broadly at opportunities to work with partners maybe we haven't thought about, from like the energy sector, to make things happen for both of us.
Right. And I think that's like, that could be an item in the strategic plan, could be, you know, sort of, I don't know, brainstorm non-traditional partners and reach out to partners regularly and make sure they feel like they're supported. I mean, there's turnover in these agencies. So like, you know, there'll be turnover in the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank, and then there won't be anybody who knows to reach out to the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership. So maybe we should reach out on a regular basis to likely partners like Infrastructure Bank, NRCS, conservation districts, I don't know, whatever our strategic plan activity identifies as potential partners.
Yeah, and
Reach
I
out
mean,
to and maintain, relationships with likely partners.
I like that. And also, it's been so beneficial to have these meetings on the Natural History Survey's YouTube. So at least we have a reference point. So if an organization is like, what the heck is the Woodland Partnership? They can watch 10 minutes of a meeting and see what we're sitting around and doing, you know?
Just another thing to bring up, also along with our informal partner structure, is we do have the meetings to watch. Now we haven't, regularly, taken and distributed minutes, from meetings. We did for a while there when, Kate and I had the capacity to, but that's something that we could revisit at some point. I think Kate and I would need a bit of support to be able to do that now. But it could have some value in really recording our activities.
I certainly don't want to volunteer any of our partners to do that, but I've found in at least one of the Land Trust Council's subcommittee, everyone takes turns on the minutes, and it really lifts the burden off of somebody being the secretary or trying to go it alone. And that may be something we want to consider. And I don't know what the interest is.
And just along with the communications, I'll mention that the Rhode Island Woods, website is going to come out with a new theme, a new look soon. I've sort of taken over the maintenance of it from Bill Buffum, and while it's a steep learning curve for a forester learning the getting under the hood with websites, there will be a more of a section and a hopefully, updated section on the Woodland Partnership there. So that's a place that we can distribute information to. So there'll be some information on the Forest Conservation Act, for example, when it goes public. So it's a very sort of there's some specific stuff about, reaching legislators in the last plan. Is that something that I think, do we want to retain any of that or not so much?
I think so. I think I know from the Land Trust Council perspective, we are also thinking through that as an option, like perhaps take your legislator on the trail day or something, so that we can get out and meet folks and I wonder if there's some overlap between those. Maybe not, maybe they're individual and separate, but we do all have the same land conservation goals.
Mhm. We can put down, have, contact with, legislators as a sort of placeholder for right now. I know that they all, I believe thanks to John Campanini, did receive copies of the value of Rhode Island's forest report. Though I think it's helpful to have something, somewhat more specific to hold us accountable if we want to make something happen here. But we could, we can flesh that out more with input from our, more of our partners who are active in policy.
ECRI is doing a coffee hour as well as we approach the legislative session, I think. I'm pretty
Okay.
sure I got that from the last meeting.
That's right, Kate. Yeah, that will happen. Usually happens around mid-January. And then we'll also be doing the Earth Day at the State House, which happens in late April.
Okay.
Oh, and I should add the other things that we're talking about in ECRI that overlap with our legislative priorities and also with next year being an election year. We're thinking about ECRI being a good convener of gubernatorial candidates to talk about our issues.
Thanks.
Is there anything more that the Woodland Partnership could do, with ECRI? In addition, it's great that Kate, can wear kind of a couple of hats with the Land Trust Council and the Woodland Partnership, and perhaps you too, Priscilla. But if there's more that we could do to raise our profile with ECRI that could be helpful, perhaps that's something to think about. A presentation or as Kate and I did, on the forest values report a couple years ago, or I'm not sure what other forms it would take, but just
Yeah,
thinking
that's
out loud.
right. Yeah, I think, thank you for saying that out loud. I think whatever ideas or along the lines, along the year, whatever opportunities we see, I think acting on those would be great. I think that's a great example. Like whenever there is something that this group would like to present to ECRI, we could make that happen. If the group wanted to have sort of like a reoccurring time to provide updates on the monthly agenda, we can also make that happen. Kate is very much now involved both with the full board meeting, which is great, but also with the policy working group. So also think that's great continuing that. But yeah, even if we think about other ways in which we would want to maybe show that there's a collaborative effort between both groups, like we can think of special events to host, especially this day and age when we're doing a lot of it via Zoom. That's pretty easy for us to execute. And maybe down the line, this could be between ECRI and the Woodland Partnership, thinking about maybe being the convener for a solar siting discussion, just sort of thinking out loud, like things that really sort of reinforce like our partnership in figuring out solutions for more of the challenging topics.
Yeah,
I think that could be a good way.
I think you're right on, and vice versa for the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership. We're always happy to, if something needs to come over to us from ECRI, we're happy to be that space, that convener of presentations or discussions or facilitation in that way.
Anything else we think we might want to consider here, either general or more specific?
I think that knowing that Jack Sisson is on for the marketing piece, we should probably revisit the prioritizing of local wood. I know that's something we talked generally about, but didn't really get to. There seems to be a lot of energy. At least he attended a partnership meeting at New Conconet Hill and seemed very excited about the perspective of working on that.
Good idea. I'm just sort of looking over the list here. So it's a bit, generally a bit more policy oriented than economic. Because we can all think about economic things that we might want to add. I know that Mark Tremblay of RIFCO and for example, and Scott Millar will likely bring some ideas there. But what I have right now is it's sort of essentially kind of a series of bullet points. Kate, maybe you and I can go over that and distribute this out to the to the partnership before the next meeting to give them something to think about, and that could inform getting into the next sections, and fleshing it out a bit more.
I think noting that we don't have, we received a grant for the strategic plan to put it together, and we do not have access to that funding. What we're putting together is a continuation of the information we have, and we'll do the best we can with the resources and availability of and capacity of our group. But yeah, that sounds like a good plan to me, Christopher.
Yeah, and I could see doing some sort of some kind of revised version of just these few pages here that we've been looking at. Trying to tie them to initiatives to the most likely partners that would be involved when possible. But I think David's point about flexibility and not wanting it to be a document that's sort of in amber is a good point.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that again, it's a capacity issue, but we've accomplished an incredible amount in the last 5 years that we listed in our strategic plan, which is not always the case. And especially with no coordinator and no official organizational capacity. And I hope that if we had some resources, we could share that message with everyone that is interested in this work or passionate about forests, that we are getting things done at this level.
Yeah, no, I think so. All right, well, this seems like a good time, and sort of being mindful of everyone's time. I can stop sharing here, and we can shift into partner updates. And thanks to everyone for hanging on here. Let's see. I'll just go around and call on people. How about Alana? You have any updates? You just we're talking about the forest ecosystem monitoring cooperative there.
Sure, yeah. And like I said earlier, it's been a while since I've been on one of these calls, so I'm hoping I'll be able to attend more consistently each month in the future. But yeah, I wanted to mention, and Kate sent out an email with the last reminder that FEMC has a couple of new tools that they put out, and I think this is quite relevant, especially if we're looking for to support monitoring in this strategic plan. They have two tools. This is data-driven stuff, the forest impacts of climate change, so monitoring indicators of that. And also they have a tool which is they're calling tracking shifts in disturbance regimes. So similarly, disturbance regimes being, non-native and native insects and diseases, flooding, weather events and stuff like that. So I wanted you guys to be aware that those are out there. Maybe I can share some links that could be shared with the rest of the group. But also, as maybe some of the more common attendees here are familiar with FEMC being very willing to, do some outreach with this type of stuff. They have asked if there would be an interest in like a walkthrough of these tools. And I didn't know if the group thought that might be an interesting focal topic in the future, if anybody would be interested in that. And of course, that could be in a longer term timeline, doesn't have to be in the near future, or it could be.
Definitely. Yeah.
Is that something that could be accomplished, sort of doing, as sort of a presentation, during one of these Zoom meetings, Alana?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And probably not like through me, but maybe through like Pia, their project manager, or Alyssa, their communications person. But yeah, sort of like a Zoom type of thing during one of the Woodland Partnership meetings.
Great. Definitely noted.
Okay.
Thank you.
I can maybe reach out and get us all in conversation and, have it out there in the ether for when it makes sense most.
Sounds good.
And one other FEMC related update, I think probably it was last meeting, maybe, or maybe it was last one, Nancy might have mentioned the FEMC annual meeting, which was planned to be potentially hosted in Burlington, Vermont in person, or maybe a hybrid model, but they just announced that it's going to be fully remote. So maybe that means there's a little bit more accessibility and in terms of, it might be a little bit lower of a registration fee, but, and I think Fern just signed off. She was planning on attending with me, but it's going to be a virtual thing. Just let you guys know about that.
It's going to be on December 16th and 17th.
Yes, thank you.
You might like to participate. Great, thank you. Patrick, how about you? Any updates from the Southern District?
Yeah, not too much. I've transitioned from writing farm conservation plans to farm implementation. So I had a great meeting with Christopher yesterday and the folks at the Westerly Land Trust. They're working on a forest management plan contract. Other than that, I've been very busy learning this new process, so I'm not too in touch with what the rest of the district is working on right now. But yeah, everything's going well. So
Thanks. Lou, how about you? What's happening on the urban forestry front?
A few things. Yeah, again, like Alana, I've been able to make the last few, so it's good to see you all. So we've been working for a while on updating our urban forest webpage, and so we recently added 3 new sections. So we're kind of at a completed section now where we added some tree care and maintenance, urban forest management for communities, and a trees nature-based solution section that covers green infrastructure and the climate and health programs that we've been working with Molly on at American Forests. So we have that. So definitely check that out if you get a chance. And then the other big thing we've been working on, we've been putting together a guide for Rhode Island communities to develop tree ordinances. So we're really close to having our first draft completed for that. So we'll hopefully be looking for any assistance for reviews and things like that. If anyone's interested, then let me know. And then we will be having a tree warden workshop on November 9th. For any tree wardens in here, Paul, I guess. And that's about it for me.
How many communities don't already have a tree ordinance?
Quite a few. Yeah, it's definitely not as many as you'd like.
I'd have thought it was more.
Yeah, and we're also we made it so that we want communities to revisit their current ordinances too, to see, because a lot of times they're not necessarily built for the communities that are actually in place there. So.
Yes. Well, let me move over to Paul. Paul, are you the Situate tree warden?
I am still the tree warden. And we're working on wrapping up the farm energy grant as soon as agriculture signs the transitional agreement. We've wrapped up forestry for the birds, so that has been done. Thank you for the Woodland Partnership help with it. Our geothermal grant is being over. So we're continuing doing the forestry assistance with the subaward to URI. And we are working on a grant with NSAVE on doing farm energy work for farmers, just to tell them where they can get all their grant monies and how to proceed from there. So that's where we are.
Sounds like you're busy. A lot of grant activity there.
A lot of wrap up.
Yeah. All right, let's go over to Priscilla.
Hi, and here's where I'm honest, where I mentioned I had to quickly step away, but just let me know what you want me to cover, Chris, and I will do that.
Oh, sure. We're just doing partner updates here on anything that you'd like to share about yours or Audubon's or larger work that's relevant to the partnership.
Okay, great. Very quickly, I can mention at Audubon planning a town hall conversation over Zoom for Audubon members, but partners and the public are open to join us. I think most likely that will be the evening of November 30th, and that's just for Audubon members and the public to just get a sense of what our legislative priorities will be. And it would also be the first time that myself and Dr. Charles Clarkson, our new ornithologist, will be presenting sort of a unified approach in our work at Audubon, both driven by science and advocacy and organizing. So I think that should be interesting, and hopefully we're hoping to continue more of those town hall conversations. And then in addition to that, the Environment Council of Rhode Island, along with Audubon and other members of the council, are working to figure out what our strategy will be to move legislation or sort of move our priorities throughout the legislative session. So there's a lot of work happening in that space. One of our upcoming meetings is November 1st. And that is from 5 to 6:30 online. We post our agendas on the Environment Council's website, and we have both Commissioner Nicholas Ucci from the Office of Energy Resources and Acting Director Terry Gray from DEM joining us to talk about their priorities and to also talk about how they plan to carry out the workflow for the Act on Climate implementation work, which continues to be a very high priority of the Environment Council as we shape the rest of our agenda. So I think those are two key things coming up over the next month.
Yeah, glad to know when those are. Thank you. Sounds like an important priority setting time of the year for your work. Let's go over to David.
Definitely.
Well, I'll just give you the update on BioBlitz that happened October 1st and 2nd. We had about a little under 120 people turned out in COVID times. That was really good for an outdoor event in beautiful foliage and weather in Cumberland. We found 700, well, the preliminary count before a few things got added was 777 species in 24 hours. And the cool thing about that is that when we had a BioBlitz at the Cumberland Monastery in 2006, we found 777 species. And I did not fudge that. They came out exactly the same because I didn't even look at the other one until after I'd finished compiling. So one thing we can say for sure is that there are 777 species in Cumberland. That's it. So anyway, that's the update.
I have to ask, did you know how many different species there were from last time?
Well, we'll be doing a statistical analysis on that, feeding it all into R and getting out some charts and graphs and stuff. But box and whisker, yeah, all that.
You know what the record high has been?
For BioBlitz, it's I think about 1,400 in 24 hours, which is I think Jamestown maybe hit that. But we had kind of open water, we had estuary, salt marsh, and then upland and farm. It was amazing. Yeah.
Nice. Well, sounds great. I'm glad it was such a successful event, and I'm sure people that were enthusiastic to be able to come together outside these times and have the BioBlitz.
It was a ball that I just a big shout out to the Cumberland Land Trust. They knocked it out of the park, man. They were the best partner. They were so on the ball.
They're all volunteer too. It's a pretty amazing organization.
They were great to work with.
Awesome. Kate, bet you've got a few updates.
LOL. Sure. Let's see. Priscilla and I have been working on fleshing out the Land and Water Conservation Summit for 2022. And you may have all seen the survey go out requesting information about potential networking events or alternative events or in-person versus virtual and topic recommendations. We're closing that survey tomorrow. It's been pretty impressive. We've had 100 and 70 people respond, which is pretty huge. And we've gotten a lot of good information. The RCP gathering is next month, and I would highly recommend it if you have the opportunity to attend. There's always a lot of really good information shared, and potential opportunities for future partnerships with folks outside of our state, in our bordering states. What else is going on? I'm trying to finish up those partnership agreements for NRCS for that RCPP grant. So that is chugging along. And land trustees, we just had our last events last weekend. We're hoping to have a few walks around the holidays around Thanksgiving. So stay tuned for that. And there's plenty more, but I feel like we talked about a lot today. So I think that's, I'll end it there. Thank you.
Sounds good. John, any updates from Prudence Island that you'd like to share?
Nothing in particular. I'm sorry I had to step out, but figured I'd come back to see if there's anything wrapping up here.
Sure. Good to have you back. And just another word about the RCPP gathering. So the theme is it's land justice, the heart of resilient regions and communities. It is on Thursday, November 18th, which is our typical third Thursday for the Woodland Partnership. But since it is an important theme, that we've said that we'd like to do more with, we are going to move the partnership meeting perhaps to the Wednesday beforehand. Kate and I will follow up with you on that, but yeah, really encourage you to check out all or part of the gathering that day, and we'll send an email around with more info and a sign up link soon. So also from my neck of the woods, the adaptive silviculture for climate change, the Rhode Island component of that, larger project is, started by UConn and, now involves a replicate site at the Decapit Preserve down in Richmond, is starting to get implemented. So I've been out there with Will Walker and Tom Worthley and, PhD student from UConn, and starting to, to map out the different, treatment areas, and we'll be doing preliminary, inventory and, plans for, laying out the different treatments over the coming months. So that's good to have that project. It's officially a 3-year McIntyre Stennis grant project here in Rhode Island underway. And then just also thought I'd give you guys a heads up that there's some work going on a proposal for a Forest Service landscape scale restoration grant that would focus on the Blackstone River Valley in Rhode Island, particularly tree planting in Central Falls, in Woonsocket, for more urban tree plantings, and then possibly also a forest management plans component in Cumberland, which is a part of the state where I understand there's a relatively low rate of forest stewardship plans among the landowners there, but that's where the Pawtucket reservoirs are and some high conservation value areas. So I'm involved, with those discussions. There might be some, opportunities or needs for more people to become involved with the project if it, ultimately happens. But I'm sure there'll be more opportunities to talk about it. But it could be, could be exciting to bring some more forestry attention to that part of the state. And is there anything else anybody else would like to talk about or add?
I forgot to mention that I'm trying this thing called Coffee and Cocktails with Kate Sales, and we are having cocktails at 4 p.m. If anyone wants to meet some of our land trust folks and just chat. And then every Tuesday through the month at 8:30 in the morning, I've got a Zoom going for anyone to drop in and talk about whatever, land conservation, in an attempt to try to meet all of our folks from our 45 individual participating land trusts. But I'm happy to chat with anyone. So I'm going to put the Zoom link in the chat if anyone wants to jump on at 4 and have a beer.
Thinking we'll have to get some data on which land trusts prefer coffee and which prefer cocktails.
It's true. True. There's really only one cocktail hour, so we might not collect the data we want. So maybe we'll have to push this out for next month as well.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for sticking with us. I think we talked a lot about a lot of important things and got a lot of good things down on paper that will ultimately lead to having that updated policy and economics part of the strategic plan. Good to see you all online now, and hopefully in person out in the woods or around Rhode Island for too long. And we'll be in touch about the specifics of the next meeting.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Great, thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.